Welcome to Burning Ledgers, a podcast by CFOs for CFOs, exploring how AI is reshaping finance, from technology to strategy to execution. I'm Matthias Steinberg. Each episode, we aim to bring you honest peer-to-peer conversations with forward-thinking finance leaders, experts, and analysts, sharing their stories, lessons learned, and prediction for the future. Let's light it up. Today, I'm excited. I'm joined by Mark McDonald. Mark is the founder of Finance Next, where he advises finance leaders on the adoption of AI. Previously, Mark was a senior director at Gartner with a focus on the use of AI and ML in finance and accounting. Prior to moving to research and becoming an analyst, Mark spent over 20 years in finance. And welcome to the show, Mark.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. And it's nice to see you again. We've met before.
Exactly. So when we thought about who would be a great guest to speak about what's in store for us in 2026, you were our first pick. We've met a few times, mostly at the Gartner CFO conference when I was part of workshops or CFO circle sessions around AI and ML in finance. I can personally say Mark has always been, for me, and also for the company I work for, MindBridge, a really important voice, and he always has created a guiding star for us about ML in finance. And so, I'm very excited you're here. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. It's flattering. Yeah. No, it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Good. So let's dive right in. We want to talk today about what can we expect for AI in finance in 2026? What does our immediate future look like? And we thought, before we talk about 2026, maybe it makes sense we take stock. Where are we today, and how did we get here? And maybe you could lay that out before we then start looking into 2026.
Yeah, that's a good thing. It's good that we do that, actually, because there's some, the story's evolved quite a bit in the last several years. And actually, about 2 years into this whole thing, I think I publicly went out and said it. I'm getting out of the business of predicting what's happening in the future because it was all changing so quickly. I would in 1 year say, oh, AI doesn't do this. And then the next year we would be doing it, right? So, but I think things are starting to shape up a little bit now. I think it's starting to look a little bit more predictable, and it's a little easier to kind of say what's going to happen next. And if we take a step back and we look at how we got here, I think that we can kind of see that. So the way I kind of like to think about it is like, first of all, we don't need to go way back to like 1960 or 1950 when some of the underpinnings of AI actually started. What we can do is divide that whole history into the pre-ChatGPT era and then what happened after it. Right. So pre-ChatGPT, it was analytics, it was machine learning and so forth. Super valuable, really neat, but not terribly accessible to most finance teams. You saw it in little pockets here and there, but it wasn't like broadly adopted. It required skills that we didn't have. And most of us were busy in that era, implementing or re-implementing ERP systems. 2023, when ChatGPT hit the market, is when things kind of started to get interesting, right? And so what the main question was then from finance people, and this I heard a lot at Gartner, is like, hey, what is AI? That was the question we had. Right. And if you can remember those barriers, I'm sure you remember Matthias, right? When it first came out, everybody was saying like, oh, well, geez, it only knows information up to November 2022. Remember that? There was the timeliness issue. Yep. The security thing just was a no-go for finance, right? You type a question, the world knows it, was kind of the idea. And then there was also this problem of like local context. Right. It can maybe plan your trip to Italy, but it can't plan your inventory requirements for the next year. And those are pretty serious barriers that were kind of like, this doesn't look like it's going to work very well for finance. Right. So 2024 rolls around And guess what? We start solving all of those problems, right? We get this thing called RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which allows you to kind of upload your local context and use a large language model to look at your local contents, ask questions about, I don't know, your accounting policies or whatever, right? Was pretty useful. We start getting all these enterprise solutions in place that manage the security. All right. So we solved a lot of the barriers that we were just complaining about even a few months before they started to getting solved. So now we have new questions. Right? People now are asking like, hey, well, okay, so we can solve that. Now, what can I do with this skill? Right.
Yeah.
What are the use cases? 2024 was the year of the use case.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I think I was in a discussion with you where I think they were in the room probably 25 CFOs, and the two main questions I heard, and also speaking with everyone, was what are the use cases that actually work, that where I can deploy AI, and what's the ROI, and then maybe connected to that, and how do I actually quantify the ROI? Because sometimes it seems to be ROI, but it's very hard to actually capture it and put it in a hard calculation. So I very much remember that, and I agree. That was really what we all struggled with last year.
Yeah, and that was how we're going to get to the ROI one in a second. That's a fun one, but the about like what can it do and what are the use cases in 2024 was still kind of hard to answer really well because we still had some barriers that were hard for finance. And most notably, the barrier we had is that finance is a numbers function. The answers, the things we talk about are about the numbers in our business. And generative AI is a text-based tool. Right? It analyzes text. So bridging this gap between a text-based technology to a numbers-based function was difficult. So the barriers here were not just that, right? The logic, the math, and so forth, but it was also the hallucinations. We can't forget that. Those were other barriers that we had, right? 2025 rolls around and we kind of see some solutions for that. And most notably, we see a couple of things. We see this advent of like the reasoning model, or it's more like a design process, and this agentic framework. Huge, really huge. And think about it, in a year, right? In 1 year, agents went from nobody knowing what they were to it being synonymous with AI. That's massive, right? Everybody has heard of agents within a year. And this did solve a lot of problems that the previous problems that we had. We could offload a question that a large language model would struggle with. We could offload it to some customized tool, right? So back to that inventory requirements. Yep. You could build a customized tool that determined your inventory requirements, and your large language model, your ChatGPT or your Claude or Gemini or whatever, could offload the question to the tool that you build to answer your specific context. And you can use these reasoning models then to kind of like help plan your answer, solve the problem step by step. That is a huge evolution and a huge benefit. And it starts to kind of put us in a pace where we're running out of objections.
Yeah. Would you say it's correct? The way I've come to think of it is LLMs, they have, we have learned to use LLMs where they are strong and not rely on LLMs where they are weak, which, as you just said, would be around, numerical data. That's not what they're built for. They are non-deterministic in nature, which makes it for finance quite difficult. If I do the same or ask the same question 3 times, I want 3 times the same answer, the correct answer. And I think what you're describing is using the LLM as almost the interface, but then the LLM is offloading the analytics or the analytical parts that it's not very good at to tooling that's very good at it. Either the specific tooling that we already have in the company, or it's machine learning, or it's Python, which can be often seen how it pops up. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
That's exact easy way to think about it. There's obviously more technical complexity behind that, but for us in the finance profession, this is huge, right? Because that gives us now some control over how this thing is working. It gives us auditability, explainability, right? It's massive for us. It does start to kind of present some new problems for us. It's like, okay, well, now if I need to build all those custom things, I mean, you can use agents from vendors and providers, true, but like if you're building like things for your organization, you need to know something about how to build all this stuff. And even if you have tools that can build them for you, you need to understand what they're doing, how they're structured. I mean, we can't just let things explode out there. And so the new barriers start to emerge here in towards the end of 2025 is like, how am I going to do this without creating more problems? Right. And that's not really as much a technical problem as it is kind of an us using the technology problem. We need to kind of start to readapt. And I think that that's kind of like a little bit where we are now, right? We're at this position where we're recognizing that like we need to do something about this. It doesn't do everything magically for us.
What would you say, still in the interest of taking stock where we are, if every CFO needs to ask, am I doing the right steps? Am I staying sufficiently ahead of what's happening? Because the quality of the work my team does, the quality of the work we do and I do for my company depends on, of course, that I adopt the right technologies in time. How do I know as a CFO right now that I'm on the right track? Where should I be right now? And it's very, very hard right now to say, I feel, I'm doing enough. I'm doing the right things. I'm already, on a path to success. What would be the indicators I should be looking for? And the question I should ask myself to calibrate whether I'm doing enough or not?
Yeah. So I can answer that generically. It's tough to answer generically because there isn't like a one size fits all answer to that. And we see out in the market, there's a large dichotomy out here. We've got some people that are really advanced and sophisticated that are being very, very aggressive about this, and they're pretty far along. And then we've got a lot of people that are far behind. And so, the answer looks different for both of them. And some businesses are frankly going to benefit more than others. A small business that has, a few hundred people working for it, might, I don't know, they might not get the short-term immediate gain. Long-term they will, but they won't get the short-term immediate gain than like a huge company that might have like a lot of costs that they can shave off of, right? So where you should be right now, you should, if you're not using AI anywhere, it's time to get started. And I think people know that by now. And I think the numbers kind of show that most organizations are there. Surprisingly, there are some that are not. But we need to talk about where that is, because rolling out Copilot or giving everybody access to Copilot does not satisfy the AI checkbox. Having maybe some tools available to one or two people that have like improved their job in one department, in one location, that is also not checking the box. That is just somebody's improved their individual productivity. We need to have it where you should be right now is either experimenting or already have in place some type of a process somewhere, at least in one place in your finance organization, where you have an organizational process that is using AI to shave out manual effort. Right? And what do I mean by that organizational process? It means it's a process that's more than just one person doing their job. It's where it's a flow that goes from person to person, and that flow has some AI automation. Accounts payable is a great example. Right, from like ingesting the invoice to doing your three-way matching, getting approvals if you need to get approvals, maybe handling disputes, and then finally paying the invoice. That's what I mean by like an end-to-end process.
What would you say a theme that I hear quite recurring, and we did have Mary Myers of HPE on the podcast, and what she also spoke to is that it's usually not enough just to plug in a AI tool and an AI enabled tool into an existing process, but that usually, or it is more effective to actually rethink how you do the process based on the capabilities that AI can provide you. Would you agree with that?
Oh my gosh, yes. There's a lot to talk about on that topic. So yes, definitely. I'll give you a very simple, high-level example. So if you think about a current organization that might produce something right now, you might have one department that might be responsible for like efficiency and speed, and you'll have another department that's responsible for quality. Two topics that often are kind of like opposed to one another or kind of conflict with one another. And if each of those separate departments develops their own AI-driven process to satisfy the speed on one hand and the quality on the other hand, all you're going to do is you're going to build AI-driven processes that fight with one another. And so what you need to do is you need to think about using an AI process that optimizes not speed or quality, but speed and quality. And that's a rethinking, not just of how you manage a process, but how your organization works together and how people work together. So it's big. Yeah, for sure. But there's some challenges here. There's some challenges because that's a big step, right? If you can't just say, you could get confusing if somebody says, oh, we're going to use AI here for the department that does speed, and we're going to use AI here. Oh, we have to redesign the whole process before we can use AI. Nothing happens. It's too overwhelming. So what we do here is we kind of start just using AI to replicate the processes that we currently know, right? Do the tasks that we currently know. And then as we automate those, we start to recognize, oh, we need to kind of combine those and restructure that. And it's not the most efficient evolution, but it's kind of necessary in order to implement all of this stuff while we're running an operational business.
So Mark, to your point, I think the use cases that you mentioned, AP as a use case that is a good place to actually start implementing AI, where we can automate, where we have value, where we don't have where processes don't span too broadly the enterprise to make it more complicated. Other use cases that I seem to see emerging is investor relations, being text-based, probably a prime use case for LLMs. We have internal reporting quite often, and then also like forecasting and scenario planning, I think are. Would you agree those are good places to look for a start?
So let's start with the investor relations piece. Totally. Yeah. That's a good one. Actually, surprisingly, like a lot of the early adopters, the first use cases that I was starting to see organizations independently roll out were in investor relations. And it makes sense because anybody who has an investor relations team is going to be a large company. They're going to have a little bit of capability to do some experimentation. And that's a good place to start because it's all text-based. Right. So that made sense. The other use cases, so forecasting, you mentioned forecasting scenario planning. So can this be done with AI machine learning? The answer is a resounding yes. It is not that easy to do. It takes a little bit of work. So what we saw in research is that a lot of people started AI initiatives with the forecasting scenario planning in mind, but they didn't all achieve it right away. And my experience is what I've seen is to be able to replicate a forecast takes, depending on the size and complexity of your organization, at least a couple of people with data science experience working a solid year on that problem. And then the scenario planning is kind of like an extension of that. All scenario planning is just different inputs into a forecast. And if I automate the forecast, then I just give it different inputs, right? So it can get done faster after that, but it just takes a little effort.
You just, maybe this is a good segue into another question I had for you, which is success rates. We just spoke about 25 being the year where first use cases are emerging that lend themselves well. The numbers that can be that are produced by analysts or by the industry about success of AI implementations are staggering because they are indicating that the vast majority currently, or in 2025, of AI implementations have failed. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is this over exaggerated? And if it's not, what are the causes, or what's happening here?
Yeah. So, I believe that number is probably right, as far as like people that are reporting it. But, the problem isn't AI. I mean, I don't want to say it's our fault, it's people, but I mean, AI is working. It does what it does. The problem is we don't know where to use it or how to use it successfully yet. And what I often see is there's a sweet spot with the solution of what and this is a totally new thing for us, right? We're using a computer process, right? A technology to do things that we only ever thought people were capable of doing. And so what happens is we've got a group of people that come in on the low end of expectations, and they'll come up with a use case that is underwhelming, and they might be successful with that use case, but it isn't really useful. Like, let's have this thing. Maybe I'm being a little facetious here, but let's have this thing write our Christmas party invitation this year, or I don't know, help me reformat this thing that I wrote, right? Neat, but not terribly useful. So that's going to get a negative mark when it comes to like success. It didn't really do much. It worked, but it wasn't useful. Then on the other end, you get people, I'll use the same example as before, that might come in and say like, hey, AI, plan my inventory for next year. And without taking some time to structure that problem, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right? So they'll also be disappointed and say, well, that didn't work either. Right? So we find a minimum number of people that are recognizing that sweet spot in the middle. It's like how to balance what AI things can do for us and where people are necessary. Where does it really work well? And I think that we'll get past that here in the next year. So we figure that out.
And I think what I'm hearing from you is basically what you just described is almost like a matrix between value and complexity, right? We got to find those use cases where being successful means there's a real like change in performance. We can really automate something. We can really be faster or have new functionalities. And then, but it's not too complex that the failure rate will be too high.
Yeah, and what's interesting with the AI thing is that just because you built something small that might not be terribly useful on its own, we can start to stack that next to other things and then combine them to make something more useful. I mean, think about like when we do something as a person, we're not just doing, when we execute a task, we're not just doing one thing, we're doing several things. Right? We've gotten good at it, so we don't realize that like, if I look at a document and I take information from that document and I put it on somewhere else, that seems like one task, but it's like several tasks for AI. One is looking at the document, properly reading it, right? And then interpreting it, and then moving it to where it needs to go. Those are all different tasks. And if you build each one of them individually by themselves, those things individually might not be useful, but together they become useful. So the success thing kind of builds as we get better at this over time.
Yeah, it almost sounds like we as finance folks shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. I think what you're describing is recognizing that it is a journey, and that it is probably a lot of. It's not going to be that silver bullet that one day we'll unleash. It's going to be a lot of steps. There's a lot of learning, and we need to be on that journey. And if in the first steps we don't have like a transformational outcome, that's okay, right? I think as long as the premise, we subscribe to the premise that AI is here to stay, it will be hugely transformational, and we all, us as financiers with our teams, need to be on the journey of figuring it out, how to use it for our specific, setting and the company that we work in.
It's exactly right. And this is where we are now, I think, and where we will be next year, is that we will start recognizing collectively, right, on average across all groups, is like, hey, this isn't an action item. This isn't a project that we need to implement. This is a transition, a full transition to how we do things completely differently. And, if you think about, now I'll just kind of go to the accounting side. If you think about like an accounting close checklist, right, that can be huge, monstrous, right? every single item on that checklist is a different, unique problem that we need to solve with AI if we want to automate it. And you'll have to go through all those things and make sure that they're done accurately and correctly. And then comes the big new thing that we're going to start seeing next year is like, how do I orchestrate all of this? How do I make sure that I just don't have like 5,000 different unique Excel spreadsheet like projects running around, and that I have some centralized control over this, not just in finance, but across the entire organization, right? That's the next thing. I think that's in 2026 we start to recognize.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. One way to think about AI is you described a lot of automating something that's currently done by humans. So there's a big aspect of automation, which to me means maybe we do it a little bit differently, but it is helping us do what we do today better, faster, more efficient, higher quality, higher response times. And then the other aspect will be doing things that we can't do right now, or that we are not doing today, that are valuable. And I think that goes hand in hand with an evolution of the role of the CFO from, I think he was a guardian of resources, he was heralding basically utility. The way I think about the very classic finance functions is we are a utility, right? It's all that stuff that if you do it well, everyone is happy, but no one notices. And if you do it poorly, you will know about it. And there's a lot of downside. There's very little upside. But CFOs and finance functions, I think in the last 10 years, have moved way more what sometimes is called, being a value architect, being really a function that has a tangible impact on top and bottom line. And I think this is what gets me really excited. Do I love automation? Do I love efficiency? Absolutely. But where I get really excited is thinking about, that changing role and how AI can actually help us, assume that role and being effective in that role. Maybe you can speak a little bit about that. And I think that's maybe a segue to now starting to look a little bit more into the future.
Yeah. So you said a couple of things that were really intriguing there. So you said how AI requires us to do things differently, as well as introduces new things. And there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, but how we do things differently is really the interesting part that we start looking out into the future. And in my own work and the things that I've done for my clients, I start to recognize like things that would take months with many people, I can literally do in hours. I'll explain, right? And so I use code to solve some things. I know that not everybody does, but you don't need to be a coder to understand how to use these things. It's like what I'll do is I'll kind of define the thing that I want to solve. I'll write it down, and then I'll go to one of my tools. I use Claude and Claude Code. And I will say, here's the problem I want to solve. How do I go about solving it? Here are the issues, and here's what the outcome should be. And it will start suggesting an approach. And I'll say, okay, go write this program that does this and solves this and give me the answer. And then I'll just throw it on the end. It's like, hey, let's put this all into a nice little web page that is interactive, so that whoever's getting the output of what I do can adjust different variables. And that's my new spreadsheet. I'm just going to deliver that. And it's a full, a fully functional, deep analysis with backup and everything. And all I was doing the whole time was managing the computer to do the work. And what I've really learned interestingly about that process is that sometimes I'll start solving the problem and I'll recognize I made a wrong assumption at the beginning. I went down the wrong path. And, normally, in the finance world, you're like, oh my gosh, I got 2 days left. I can't start over again. I'm just going to have to keep going down this path, or I can't re-engage all those resources to redo all the work. I'll just type in, it's like, whoops, I made a mistake at the beginning. I made the wrong assumption, hit enter, get a cup of coffee, come back, problem solved. And it's just remarkable, right? That's a totally different way of doing our work when you have that level of efficiency. The new stuff is also, so that might be just doing the old analysis a new way, but there's new things that we're doing now, right? So things that we couldn't do before, like, I mean, I realize that you work at Mindbridge, right? But like error and anomaly detection is something that was antiquated the way we've been doing it for years, right? We would just look at a spreadsheet and maybe write some rules and highlight a cell red when it was wrong, right? We can throw huge amounts of numbers into an algorithmic process now and have it spit back and say like what might be heading in the wrong direction. That's stuff that we did intuitively before. We can do it mathematically now. It's different.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I exactly. You mentioned I work for a company that does anomaly detection. I joined it because the vision. I just love the vision, which still is, and it's taking, with the help of the technological advancements in AI, more and more shape. Is the vision always for me was, I always called it a monitoring cockpit for finance. Monday morning, you open a cockpit, and the same way that our colleague, the CISO, is opening a cockpit and sees, what are all the threats and what's going on, you do the same for all of your financial flows. And if you take a step back, the reason is that we have so much data and that it's so complicated that technically it just wasn't possible to have that, near real-time view of what's going on. And so the way we have been working is we have the several lines of defense. We try to make sure we don't make mistakes, and somehow we will find those mistakes. But there hasn't been any way of looking at data in almost real time what's going on. And I think for me, that is one of the most exciting places where technology and AI can just completely transform what we can do in finance. And it will also have a massive impact of that role that we can play in the organization, ultimately for the organization to be very successful.
Yeah, if you think about all the time and effort and energy that we spend in finance, making sure that things are right, that's huge, right? This goes to that ROI discussion. How do you measure the ROI then of automating assurance that we're correct, right? That gets difficult because we don't track what that costs, right? And we don't completely 100% totally offload that. We still need to use our human brains, but we get a lot of help. And when at the end of the quarter, we have to sign the document that says, I attest that all this stuff is correct, you can rest easy that night that it's probably correct. Whereas now, you're not so sure. So yeah, these are new things. They offer us a lot of new opportunities in a lot of different areas.
So we spoke about what are use cases, and sorry, I tend to bring it back to the very practical. But we spoke about use cases where AI today can, where there's good places to look for value and to start implementing. We just spoke about ROI, and I would love to dive in a little bit more. And then the last question I have, and I think a barrier that we all grapple with is, accuracy and the problem of, trusting such a new and hard to understand beast as AI with some of our vital processes. So can you talk a little bit more about ROI ultimately? And this is very much what I've experienced in the last 3.5 years in finance. As exciting as technology can be, there needs to be ROI, right? Now, when we are the first ones who, we demand that from the rest of the organization, we need to live that. So how do you think about ROI? Because that has been one of the big struggles, how to actually, quantify that and determine it for AI implementations. And then second is, how do we deal with the fact to feel secure in what AI actually does for us?
So let's talk about that. So ROI and then the accuracy. So let's talk about ROI. ROI is a fun topic. I usually say like ROI is in the eye of the beholder. Here, different organizations have different perspectives on ROI, and a lot of the early adopters, usually from large companies, kind of had the instinct like, hey, this could probably be worth it. Let's throw some money at it and see if it works. They weren't concerned about ROI. And the surveys revealed that most organizations didn't even try to measure ROI on it. And that was probably okay. I think that was good. I mean, as long as you're not spending millions and millions of dollars, that's okay. as you start getting to the millions of dollars, you do need to count ROI. And the thing is that for every different project, every different initiative, you're going to have to look at it differently. The rules to calculating ROI don't change. It's about how much does it cost to implement the tool and how much cost is it going to avoid. Those rules are still there. And that's going to be different for every implementation. So it's hard to say like, what's going to be my ROI for, hiring 2 people that have skills that I don't have right now. That's very difficult to do, but you can do it on a project level for sure. We have to really think about where we're going to get that ROI because it's not always where you expect it. So I spent a lot of time on the accounts payable space because it's a very popular use case. It's easy to get ROI from. But, some of the ROI that you get from that, you don't really measure right now. There are costs that you don't measure. Much like at MindBridge, right? So you do error and anomaly detection. Nobody measures the cost of an error.
Yep.
I mean, except for the big ones, right? But like the general errors, we just fix them and move on. We don't track the time. So what's your ROI? Well, it depends on your cost. Same in the AP space. Fraud, payments that aren't unauthorized payments that you end up paying and you don't get money back for. Those things are tricky. You don't even know they're happening sometimes. Most fraud doesn't get detected until 12 to 14 months after it happened. So if you're saying today, oh, we don't have any fraud problems, it's like, well, you can't really answer that until 12 to 14 months from now. And we can use AI to help mitigate those costs that you're not counting right now, right? So in addition to like all the productivity stuff, there are some of those things. Here on another one, like on an accounts receivable, unauthorized discounts taken, right? And some customers play this game. They know that they can short pay an invoice by $99 and it's just going to get written off, right? Because it costs more than $99 to go chase the short payment. We can use AI to do it. It's no marginal cost to going back for the $99, where in the past you would have just written it off, right? But we don't really count that as an expense. We often forget that that's where ROI comes from. So my point is that every single use case, everything that you do, you need to think about what your costs really are. Sometimes you don't measure them to get that value. Another point on ROI. I think some of the fever has reduced here on like, wow, we can get rid of a bunch of headcount with AI, right? And that seems to has dissipated. I think in finance in particular, people recognize like, hey, you know what? There's just a value if I can lower the workload for people. I experienced this. I was the first car in the parking lot in the morning and I was the last one to leave at night. Like if my workload was reduced by 50%, I would still be working full time. And I think most finance people can say that. If I reduce everybody's workload by 30%, I think we still have plenty of work to do. So It's not about the headcount. It's about doing the work, getting the work done that we should be getting done.
And if I might just add to that, I think generally it can be expected that AI will start with the more mundane tasks, right? Where human creativity, intelligence, and really the full power of the human mind is required. That's the hardest place for AI to actually compete with us. So it will compete on the lower end, and I subscribe to that as well. You are still there 12 hours a day, but now you just freed 50% of your time from doing things that a machine can do very well, and you can actually do things which probably are less in the utility function, are more really figuring out how to create value for the company.
Yeah, and fun. And look, I don't want to say that like AI isn't going to take away any jobs, because look, it will. Like those jobs that are like data processing, that are just like, if you just stamp things and put a staple in it, move it on to the next pile all day long, it's like those jobs have always been vulnerable to automation and technology. The AI is going to make them very, very vulnerable. But if anybody who does thinking in their job can get help from AI, they can actually do a better job.
Yeah. And I think
organizations need it. Organizations need more work from finance, right? We just don't have enough people in the field. We see that the workforce in finance is dwindling. So this is a great way of like using the available capacity that we have.
Yes. And I think as finance leaders, one way of getting our teams to take part in it. I'm a strong believer is, everyone needs to work with AI, and I think that is a given. So let's help our teams to be part of that journey. Let's help our teams become experts. And even if today I'm someone who does manual APs, and the company is working on some form of automation, the best way forward is the attack and be part of that process. Become knowledgeable about it. I think I'm very sure that there will be many years to come requirement for that specific knowledge. How do you transition and a formerly manual or like traditional AP process into the future? So I think motivating and enabling our teams to be part of it is really important.
It's extremely important. And that kind of leads on a little bit to like what we can expect in 2026, right? So I mentioned before that the barriers are coming down. It's like almost every finance organization needs to be doing something here. And at the same time, we see an aging finance workforce. I can't remember the exact statistic, but a few years ago, I did a presentation. I did some research for a presentation where I calculated that about a third or quarter or a third of the finance workforce was going to be within 5 years of retirement. And that was 3 years ago. So you have a large portion of finance employees that are at retirement age.
Yeah.
And you got to think realistically. If we come and we say, hey, this is the year, everybody, we're doing AI. You're not going to do it the old way anymore. You got to learn a whole new set of technologies. I think that we're going to see a lot of people that are at the end of their career. They're going to say, you know what? I've had it. I'm done. This is enough for me. The stock market's been doing well. My retirement accounts look good. I'm out, and we may see some voluntary retirements starting in finance and a further deterioration in numbers of our workforce, and it's going to force the AI topic even more.
Which again, also is what you're describing is almost like an organic move into and more an AI enabled finance function, and it will play into I think in a tangible way into that ROI discussion you just approached.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? And so for finance, it isn't a question about ROI. It's about just keeping the lights on, right? It's like we need it just to keep up. And look, it's not just about retirements. We have fewer people coming into the profession as well. And even the research shows that we have a lot of people leaving the profession at mid-career.
Yeah.
So we have a numbers problem in finance, and AI can help us sustain the workload, probably even do a little bit more with even a less workforce. And so it's an opportunity for us, not just for ROI, but just to get our jobs done.
Yeah, like case in point to what you're just saying is I've been close to audit firms, external audit firms for the last 3 years in my professional role. One of the biggest drivers of technology and AI adoption is the difficulty to hire juniors and to hire enough talent to do the job in the traditional way. There's just less and less interest in becoming an auditor, and so it's literally a vital requirement to stay competitive in the market is to automate and figure out which tools can actually fill that gap that is opened up by a lack of hiring. It's exactly what you just described.
Yep. So that we'll start seeing some of those transitions in the workforce, but not like we think, at least not in finance, right? I think there was this thought there would be these massive layoffs and accountants standing in the unemployment line, so to speak. I don't necessarily predict that. I predict that AI comes to help us get our jobs done.
Yeah,
basically.
I held one thought a few minutes ago when you spoke about how to think about the return on a project. I think one way to think about it also is when there's almost like different layers to the return and to the value that a certain project brings. The easiest is always, I don't know, recently I had an example where we implemented a software and our customer would simply kick out another third-party vendor. They were more expensive. They took more time. They were less effective than the software. That is a no-brainer or business case for anyone. There's no pain on the customer side. Then the next one is probably additional to some cost savings. You have more value. You can do things now that you couldn't do before. You spoke about anomaly detection. We find errors. You spoke about some form of fraud or manipulation by your customers. You find that now. So here is some ROI. That's the next layer. And then another layer is certainly, I think, a more strategic one or tactical one. As a company, we need to figure out AI, because I think the premise, or I strongly believe, is if we don't, at some point we will start falling behind in competition with our in the industry. So there is a tactical/strategic aspect to it as well, to be able to successfully implement AI and be on that learning journey and learning curve. And the externality we have here is that we see that quite often AI projects are actually, the budget for it is not within the operational budget, but it's in the strategic budgets. And so that's maybe also something for CFOs or finance professionals, teams that want to do AI projects to think about is, if it's not already a total slam dunk based on the very tangible, cost savings, think about how this project can fit into a broader, strategic project that your company is running around AI, around digitization, around automation, around maybe certain very domain specific things that this can plug in and frankly access budget from those initiatives.
Yeah. So you said some interesting things there that kind of to segue a little bit to like what we start seeing in 2026, the strategic application, right? And we did see that a couple years ago. So it was about the 2024 period, the early adopters, right? I mentioned that earlier, usually in like the investor relations space was a popular use case. The thing that's interesting about that is that except for like those back office use cases where you can often buy software just to kind of use AI to get some value, if you're going to use AI to address like your specific organizational topics, it takes a little while. It's not, you need to make some mistakes before you're really good at it. And I think that I've kind of seen that like organizations that have been trying it and working on it for like around 2 years start to take off. Then it starts to click like, I see. I now know the sweet spot. I'm not underwhelming. I'm not coming up with an underwhelming solution or overwhelming, but I know the sweet spot. I know where it fits. I know how to make it explainable, reliable, scalable, huge topic. And then they start to take off. I mean, look, doing the back office stuff is really important. We all need to do that. You can buy software to do that. That is quickly becoming the status quo. Like you have to do that. That is in the new cost. The cost structure of finance operations is a reduced cost for back office because that's automated with AI. The way you differentiate yourself is with these specific, unique things to your organization. And that takes a couple of years. And so when it comes to this year, in 2026, the first early adopters were about 2 years ago. We're going to start seeing what happens when you've spent 2 years working on this. What does an AI forward, an AI enabled finance function start to look at? We'll start seeing some of those things appeal out. And that's going to be very, very exciting and interesting, hopefully motivating for people.
So if I'm working in an organization and we didn't start 2 years ago, this would be your call to action for thinking ahead for Q1 2026 to work on a 2 or 3 year plan that figures out what are the first steps, that gives the room for failure, as you just explained, that provides the budget to experiment, sufficient budget to experiment, and sets realistic goals, which, if I understand you correctly, realistic is not that within a couple months we do truly transformational things, but that it is very much a, step by step, cherish the small wins and keep building in the right direction with a 2-year expectation horizon. Is that a fair summary of what you think?
Yeah, Yeah, and I realize that a lot of organizations can't get away with saying like, "Hey, everybody, we're going to start now. Wait for 2 years before we show you what we've done." You can't do that. That's not going to work. So what I usually recommend is like, look, I mean, if you haven't started yet, it's like let's go for some of those things that we've seen work. We know they work. Like I've mentioned them now. We've mentioned them several times now. AP, AR. There's just that stuff is so automatable. It's crazy. Like you get huge benefits from that. And take the benefits that you got from that and invest them in some experiments, right? So every organization's a little different. If you're a manufacturer, start thinking about how you can use AI to help you with setting material standards or inventory planning or whatever. There's customer pricing issues, right? Start breaking those problems down into smaller pieces and start working on those smaller pieces one by one. Maybe accounting is your focus, right? Let's take that long close list and let's see if we can take one simple thing away. Let's see if we can do reconciliations. You can buy software to help you do reconciliations. Let's start with that. And as the teams start to get more time on their hands because you've peeled it away with AI and shown them what's possible, then you can start expecting them, hopefully, to start coming up with their own ideas as to how to do this. And that doesn't happen right away. That is a 2-year transition.
Yeah. And it also, we've spoken a lot about technology, about the hard data around doing this, and there's also really a cultural aspect to it, right? And I think you just alluded to it, taking the teams along, finding this is something that Mary Meyer spoke about, finding early and supporting the early adopters or the champions in the team, and making sure that to motivate the team to actually support this and be part of that journey instead of pulling them along, getting those teams motivated to really be an active part.
Yeah, it's easier said than done. And I've seen every organization's a little different. I've seen the whole gamut. Ones that don't have any cultural resistance at all, which is fantastic, which is pretty rare, to ones that only have organizational resistance. I've seen situations, I'm going to be a little harsh and direct here. This is for CFOs, so I guess I can be. I've seen a lot of leaders feel compelled to prove to individuals in their organization that they need to accept AI. Mm-hmm. And if you're spending too much time doing that, you need to really think if those are the kinds of people that you need in your organization. Mm-hmm. I know that's not something that we like to think about, but we have to get harsh about that. Individuals can pull this whole thing backwards from a culture. It's easy. AI is vulnerable when you're starting out young. It's easy to say, "Oh, it didn't work. See, it broke. Oh, look, it did it right 99 times, but that one time it did it wrong. It's broken. It doesn't work." Right? That attitude is going to be devastating. So it's time to kind of think about that. Yeah. Who we have on board. So, from the technology side, oh boy, probably going to look this up a year from now and see how wrong I was. But, I think that there's inevitably a time where we're going to see a plateau on things. I mean, the technology is going to keep evolving, and I think we've gone through a growth spurt. I'm not sure that we need any evolution of the technology. Like, I think we could spend the next 10, 15 years in finance just figuring out how to take advantage of what we have right now. So I'm aware of the evolution and the benefits and the new things that are going on, but I'm not hanging, on every statement that comes out from every new provider. I have enough work to do with the stuff that's available now. I think that coming this year from a technology perspective, I think that one of the trends that we'll see is the official change in the mindset of finance that, hey, maybe we don't need to get everything done in the ERP system, and it's time to start thinking about offloading some of those processes we do in our ERP platforms and putting them into other platforms that can take care of that task and then interface back to the ERP system. Like ERPs are great. They've made some amazing strides in the last decade or so, but they're huge. right? And they're not notorious for being fast, and we don't want them to be. They do one thing well. They are the central source of information. They are the official source. But we've asked them over the last decade, this is our fault. We pushed all those providers to do this and to do that and be fully functional for these things. We want to do everything in the ERP system. And it's kind of difficult for us to expect those ERP systems to keep up with all of this. And I think this is the year we start to kind of shift from moving everything into the ERP system to start pulling it out and using some of these other systems around the edge that use AI to solve those processes.
Perfect. Mark, last question. Also looks to 2026, but a more personal one. What is in store for you? You left Gartner in 2025. Tell us what you're working on. So,
the thing that has motivated me throughout my entire AI phase here of my career is when I saw the light here, and it was back with machine learning models when I first got interested in this, is I kind of had a moment of reckoning. It's like, wait a second. We're spending all this time in finance to not always be 100% sure if everything's perfectly right. And we can use AI to really perfect our jobs and do what we thought we were going to do when we joined the profession. And so what my motivation is in my practice and what I do with clients is to help them realize that. Is to recognize that they can deliver the value that they thought they were going to be delivering when they first joined that profession long ago, and to make this transition to AI less painful, less risky, and frankly fun and exciting. So I'm going to continue working with clients one-on-one, helping them build plans. All the way from detailed levels like explain how things work to thinking ahead and how to plan for this no matter what the technology changes bring for us in the future.
Sounds exciting, and good luck with that. At this point, thanks. I think this was a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your the experience you've gathered over the years. I hope this is really a good source for information for our listeners. With that, thank you very much, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. A lot of fun.
Looking forward to bumping into you in the next year. See you then.
Sure will.
All right.
Yep. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Mark. This episode was brought to you by Mindbridge, the leader in AI-powered financial and decision intelligence. To learn more, visit us online at mindbridge.ai. I'm Matthias Steinberg. That was Mark McDonald of Finance Next, and this has been Burning Ledgers. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend about the show.